Hi, Stacy here, and today I want to go over 5 ways to find out if you are operating from ego. We all know ego is important, but we all want to make sure that it's balanced. And so I wrote down a few that really stood out to me and that I think are the most important when going on a personal growth, spiritual growth, or any kind of transformational journey. We really are seeking out to expand and grow. And so sometimes the ego will get in the way and, really stop us from going the lengths we really want to go. So first off, are you identifying with your belongings or your job? So anything in the material world, anything outside of yourself that you might be attached to. This is kind of a form of control, it's part of our identity. It's part of what creates us or creates our identity. An example of that is, of course, during COVID, during the lockdown, I lost all of it. I lost 2 of my jobs and my house. And I, in that moment, had a powerful realization that a lot of my identity and who I thought I was attached to my job and attached to where I lived. And that's who I was, and it feels like a part of you is being ripped away from you, right? I in hindsight, I'm like, that was totally a divine intervention. I needed to check my ego long before this, but those things happen for a reason. And in that happening, I was forced to, of course, look at what I did have, and that was, myself. I have skills. I'm smart. I know how to survive. But it forced me to get creative. It forced me to finally realize that I only have myself to rely on here. I have to find a place that I've always really wanted. And so I had made a promise to myself when I moved into my last place that I am not moving out of here unless I have my own place without roommates, because at this place I had roommates, or I'm getting married. Like that. Other than that, I'm staying here. And so when the home sold, it was very sudden, and it was like the rug was pulled from underneath me. And so when something like that happens, a tower moment or a sudden change in life where it's completely out of your control, that's when you're it's damaging to the ego. So. But in that, we always rise from the ashes and come out better. And it forces us to really connect with ourselves and really, really get into this high, almost like a higher consciousness and a higher state of being, so that we can really tap into our higher self and get as creative and ambitious as possible. Anyway, I don't want to keep going on that story, but anyway, yeah, number 1, and when we identify too much with where we live, our belongings, my car, my awesome job, my cush house, or whatever, whatever it is, when we identify too much, that, so a good way to check your ego is, if this were to be taken away from me, how much would that impact me? And so that kind of forces you to look within and see, like, what do I have inside? How can I soften that a little bit and get a little bit less attached to it? Because the more attached we are, the more control we have or think we have. And it's actually kind of, in a weird way, shooting ourselves in the foot. So anyway, number 2, do you have a fear of being judged or being vulnerable? I think we all do. We all do to some extent, right? I had a lot of anxiety all growing up into adulthood. Up until just a couple years ago, I finally was able to get rid of it completely. Unfortunately, I had to experience an ego death in order to really come all the way up from the ashes and really, really step into my authentic self, so that once you're authentic, you're not really afraid of being judged anymore. You're not afraid of being vulnerable anymore, because you are who you are. You're living in integrity. You're always doing your best. You're always doing the best you can do with what you have. Now, when you're operating too much in ego, anything anyone says that might trigger you and you take it personally, you're operating a little bit too much from ego. Because when you truly know yourself and you know you're operating in integrity and you know you're listening to your higher self and you're making moves throughout life by doing the best you can from the heart, if someone says something to you and you're like, I disagree, then you just disagree. That's you being authentic. When someone says something to you you don't agree with and you get defensive or like you coil, that's ego. That's your ego. That's because you're getting offended because your ego is slightly damaged, and it's because you're maybe confused, and most people are confused when they're operating too much in ego rather than listening to their heart and their selves. When you're constantly making moves that are coming from the heart and you're in your highest integrity, then nothing anyone says to you ever will shake you or wobble you. You're just like, okay, I got this. I'm sovereign. I got this. Like, it's cool. Like, that's your opinion. Okay. So again, when you're identifying, when you're afraid to be judged or afraid to talk about your true feelings, it's a protecting mechanism, the ego. It really does want to keep us safe, and it want to keep us in our shell. But that's when it's important to push through and face your fears and really check yourself and just say, hey, am I living in integrity? If so, then why am I afraid of what they think? They're another person, and they're it's fine to have your own opinion. Let's move on. All right, so number 3, do you block or are you resistant to guidance? So if someone is to walk up to you and say, I think you should try this, or I think you should read this book, or I think you'd really like this or that, and you immediately shut them down or just walk away or say, yeah, that's a little bit arrogant, really. And I'm guilty of this too. My mom would it actually became kind of a joke. She'd always hand me a book like, Stacey, you're just talking about your finances, and I think you really like this book, or he really helped me. And I'd be like, Mom, I have enough books, and I would always be short with her, and it's because deep down inside, I really knew I wasn't going to get around to it. And I knew that I wasn't really going to put the energy into my finances or read at that point. And so I was triggered, and I was, I wouldn't make a big scene about it, but I would kind of get this ugly feeling inside me, like, oh gosh, like I don't want to read it. I like squirm a little. And I think we all can do that from time to time, but yeah, when that's happening a lot, that is kind of arrogant. And what ends up happening though is we're not really being honest with ourselves. Like we really do want to learn more. We really do want to expand. And if we shut down, it doesn't have to be your mom, but incoming information that might actually benefit us, that's ego. That's ego just saying, no, we're safe here. We're good with what we got. And this can happen in so many different areas in our lives. It could be someone inviting you to a workshop or a retreat or anything. It's or to watch a documentary, and you're just like, no, I got this. That's your ego. And so when we're more open, that's coming from the heart. And be like, well, maybe I will pick up some nuggets from this, or maybe I will, find a new interest. That's expansion. And so that's number 3. Making excuses why you can't do something. Yeah, that's also part of it, the defensive and resistant. I feel like people, when they operate too much in ego, they become kind of an excuse machine. It's kind of limiting beliefs. Like, I can't do this because of that. I would do this, but when you find yourself saying things like that a lot, I wish I could, or I can't because that's ego. That's ego. It's keeping you small, and you're doing it to yourself, and it's subconscious. It's not like you're trying to be small, but and this is where self-awareness can step in. Like next time you're having a conversation and someone invites you to do something, or you can even be doing it with yourself. Like, oh, that thing looks cool, but I can't, because really step out and try to step away from that thought. I'm saying, like, heighten your awareness and really sit with it and lean into it and figure out, like, am I saying that I can't because I don't want to? Or is it because someone else might judge me if I go do this. What's the real reason? What's the real reason you can't or you would, but, because usually it's the ego saying, no, keep it safe. Let's keep this safe, let's keep our control going, let's keep everything under control. Let's not go explore the unknown, that keeps us small. And really, if we're not learning and if we're not growing, we're always going to receive mundane. We're always going to get like, So it's good to push our boundaries. It's good to, and I'm so guilty of this. Some things I'm genuinely just not interested in. Like someone will invite me to a Dave Matthews concert. I'm like, no, because I just know I don't want to go. There are certain things like that. Yeah. But then other things where it's like, that sounds cool, but there's a little fear. There's a little bit of fear attached to it. And so we'll make up excuses that it's something else, but is it really, So that's the rest at number 3. Number 4, are you always thinking or dwelling on the past or thinking of the future? The ego likes to do that instead of just being, just sit. There's nothing you can do about the past. It's good to take baby steps to the future and dream about the future and have desires for the future. But when we spend too much time there, that's where we start to worry. And that's a control thing too. We feel like we have control when our thoughts are in the past and in the future. But there's a line where it gets too much, and everyone's going to be different. But I know for me, I was a worrywart, and I was always dwelling on the past. Like, oh, I said this wrong, or I should have done that, or shoulda, woulda, coulda. Your past is in the past. It doesn't exist anymore. And now I definitely am living more moment to moment and just truly being present and absorbing what's around me and basking in that good energy that we spend so much time trying to create this nice environment and energy. And so what's the point of it if you're going to be like projecting into the future or dwelling on the past? All that does is create anxiety. And so, I'm not sure how much the ego has to do with that, but it seems like it would. I don't feel like our higher self would really want us to do that. I feel like we should just sit and breathe and use our 5 senses to really tap into the energy of now, because that's when new dreams are born for the future. Instead of worrying too much about it. When you have worry or anxiety, your creativity is non-existent. So when you're present, just being, that's when you can really tap into all of your senses and really get into a creation type of mode. We can't create when we're dwelling, that's energy spent in bad places. And I don't want to say bad because, we can reminisce, but but when something negative happened in the past and there's nothing we can do about it anymore, and if we're, parlaying that into the future, that's really not being fair to ourselves. So anyway, number 5, last but not least for today, do you have trouble following your intuition or using your own discernment? This is huge right now. This is really, really big right now, just with everything going on in the world. Is really, I'm seeing it everywhere, where people really just don't know left from right, up or down, right and wrong. And that's kind of scary. I can see how a lot of people are operating in fear because they just don't know which way to go. And a lot of that has to do with just not knowing how to use your intuition. And for a while there, when I was still kind of going about my day-to-day life before, and you go to work and you have your routine and you do your thing, and I call it just being caught up. You're just caught up in your day-to-day life. I started to notice that my intuition was not where it used to be as like a child or my teenage years or even early 20s. I'm like, I just don't know. I don't know anymore. And that can be frightening. Because you don't know what to do. And so when we don't have our discernment, we end up just kind of going with the herd. And even though we were saying, oh, I'm not a sheep, we still kind of subconsciously end up listening to things that can influence us to do things that our higher self really doesn't want us to do, or we truly in our soul and our heart don't really want to do. but we end up doing it to appease people or to just, it's kind of laziness really, but it's also just not knowing and being confused. And when we don't make decisions for ourselves, when we're not decisive and we're in a confused kind of state, we're going to go with the dominant energy. And the dominant energy is not always right. It's not always right. And there's a lot of chaos that can happen if the masses are just kind of being lazy with what's right and wrong and just going with the flow. Going with the flow can really, really cause a lot of trouble. And so when we can tap into our intuition is when we know what to do at any given moment, any given time. We know what's right for the greater good and for our tribe, for our family, for ourselves, and for our future. And so what I'm saying is, in other words, when you're not sure, you're operating an ego. Your ego, when there's not a definitive answer of what's safe, then it's going to be confused, and that state of confusion is also kind of a low vibration. So when we follow our intuition and we know, then the ego has taken a back seat. It really has. It's not never that they're both together, but anyway, that one was kind of tricky for me to explain, but I'll get back to it later, maybe go deeper into it later. But that was troublesome for me towards the end there, before I had my whole ego death, and I had to listen to my intuition. I had to know, like I had to use my emotions as a compass, and my soul and higher self, and I always say, like I became this like antenna, like I just knew what was right and wrong, and following the energy of where your heart wants to go, and that's when you bring your ego in. You follow your heart, and then you're like, okay, ego, left or right, it's for basic things like that, and that's real important, is to lead with your heart, and then at that point we do want to protect ourselves to some degree, but there's a lot of development that needs to happen with how they operate together, but right now it's all about balancing the two. When we're all ego, we become complacent, we hang out in stagnant energy, and therefore there's no growth or expansion or evolution. So anyway, that's it for today. 5 ways to check your ego. Anyway, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Thank you.